we could sleep. No, I don't, we never had kids sleeping in our, I always took early classes, because I wanted to get them over, easier to study in the afternoon.
Yeah, I like early morning ones and ones that ran for 3 hours. Because you only met once a week,
Oh, okay, well, we didn't have those, okay.
so.
Now, Tristan, our oldest grandson, is going up to Greeley, Ames College. And there are only 2 classes a week, Monday through Thursday. They don't have classes on Friday.
DU never used to have classes on Friday either. So I don't know, that may be a Colorado thing. Because they knew that nobody was gonna show up because they'd all be going to the mountains to ski.
Oh, okay.
And
But
what
I mean, the professors had to, well, they probably got used to it.
and what that meant was all the drinking just started on Thursday night rather than Friday night.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, when the storms came through at CU, in Denver, professors knew there was gonna be no class the next day, because all the students would, hey, 20-inch bays, new, 30-inch bays. If there was a big storm, more students were gone. If it was a 10-inch base, few. But if it was a 20-inch base or a 30-inch base that came through, there was no students the next day.
Even if you lived on campus?
Well, we didn't live on campus. These were, CU at Denver was all workers.
Oh,
The professors didn't
What's
give
everybody else,
lectures.
Jim?
They listened to the students because they knew what was going on.
1 week 20 and one next week 3.
I'll wait for a few more
Okay,
minutes.
honey, I'm behind you all the way.
Well, that's because the preacher droned on long and long,
well,
long hymns. And
I have a archaeological Bible, which I did 1 through 3, and it tells the history background of these 7 cities. It's just absolutely, I did not know at that time Philadelphia was the brother of love, at that time.
yeah.
I mean, I know it is now in Pennsylvania, but
No, that's just Greek, so.
yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know that's what the word was.
Oh. Nope. Now, DU went through, made it official. I mean, they officially said we're going to, that classes are going to be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and some will be Tuesday and Thursday. But they're not gonna do these 2 days a week things anymore. They needed to be able to have Friday as an option to accommodate enrollment or something, I forget.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what they're doing now.
Well, our other grandson will be at DU this week. He goes in tonight. He's 13. No, he's 14. He's at ID Tech, and it's a week long, and he stays there. He loves it. How many years has he been doing this? 3, 4 years now?
At least 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do these camps. I think that's
And
cool.
they're wonderful. We've been really lucky to have found this, so that the boys have a break in the summer. And something that's educational. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna look out the door, see if anybody's walking this way, then we'll get started. Because the first few minutes we'll just do some
I'm
back.
surprised. We had a good
No,
crowd
that's the
last
same
week.
thing that happened when we tried to do a revelation with men's group.
Yeah, but
Well, people seemed engaged last time.
They were.
the first 3 chapters aren't even weird. They're just greeting. And you've done a bad thing, and you better listen. Open your ears to listen.
All right, attendance is slow.
Yeah.
It was funny when the men's group did the study of Revelation, I missed the first 3 and Art Moore took them. And after he did the 3rd one, I came to church the next week and he met me at the door. And he said, Jim, we've got to get off this Revelation, or I'm gonna lose the whole men's.
Who was doing it?
Art Moore.
Oh, Art. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and get, there may be some people who are caught in conversations who are gonna join us, and that's fine. But just a brief, Mike, you weren't here last week, were you?
I was.
Yeah, okay, were you here last? Okay, then we don't have to recap last week because y'all were here. So I'm not gonna do that, that cuts out a few minutes. I wanna talk just a little bit about how we read the Bible, and we're not gonna go a lot into that, but I just wanna, it occurred to me after last week, that I had made some assumptions because of how I approach things that I probably should make clear so that everybody else at least can be forgiven. And then we'll jump in to the 7 churches and what's going on in there, and then a few concluding remarks. So here we go. It's jumped again. Woo! And we don't have to do last week. So reading the Bible, some necessary comments. And this showed up in my Facebook feed, and I thought, my goodness, right last week it showed up. So.
Okay, that's cute.
And I thought, well, that was too timely not to put in here. Also, I wondered, and it certainly didn't show up in the reading that you might have done this week, but it will show up later in Revelation, that last hymn is almost taken from the book of Revelation.
Okay.
All the crowning and the martyrs with the stuff at their feet and all of that kind of stuff will show up later on. I just want to sort of raise the question, and we don't need to discuss it, but just sort of lay it out there, that we read the Bible for a number of different reasons. And we can read it for this, for several different reasons at the same time. We may look into it at one time for one thing and into it another time for another thing. And here are some options. We read it for comfort. We read it for inspiration. I'm feeling down. I need to hear something good. How are we supposed to behave? How are we supposed to act? What are we supposed to think? So instruction or information. Scholars, non-biblical scholars, will look to the Bible for information because it reflects historical situations that they may not have any other evidence for. So the Bible becomes a source for non-biblical scholarship. So that's another reason that people might read it. Or, we might do it all of them at the same time. Read it for one thing and say, oh gosh, that feels really good. I'm going to read that part again. So I just want to sort of lay that out there. And we use, even though we read it for different reasons, we use different tools. And, a lot of people will just read it for what it says. And they'll read it literally. And if they have a particular view of inspiration, this would be typical of some very conservative churches. You might see it on a bumper sticker, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. That it's there and that's exactly what God meant. And you're supposed to take it literally. Others will read it in its historical context and try and understand what's going on in this passage. And a lot of times in the Gospels it makes sense to know what was going on between the Romans and the Jews. If you don't know what's going on, some of this doesn't make as much sense. And then sometimes you'll read it, there will be metaphors or analogies or allegories, and you'll read it and you'll be able to see things happening if you know that there are allegories and some of that stuff going on. And then you might read it as anagogical, this is how you're supposed to live moral lives. So all of those are kind of going on. And Scripture has been read in all of those ways ever since ever. We have examples of Paul using Mount Sinai and Mount Zion as metaphors. So he's using this as a metaphor or an allegory. We hear those kinds of things. So it's been going on forever. This is nothing new. What's new is sort of this early 20th into the 21st century. We can only read it literally. That comes out of that sort of very conservative side of American Christianity in particular. That's more new than anything else. So I say that because if we try and read Revelation literally, I just don't know how you can do it. You know, if you put 17 artists in a room and gave them the description of the beast, you know, 7 heads and 27 tails and all these tongues, you know, they will draw it wildly differently, you know, and so you can't do it. On the other hand, knowing a little bit about what's going on in the 7 churches, I think is helpful. So some historical or geographical context, things like that, might be helpful. And when we talk about metaphor or allegory, that's all the way through the book of Revelation, all the way through. And we'll even see some of it not quite as boldly drawn, but some of it in the 7 churches. So whatever tools people use or assumptions people use to read scripture, they all go out the window when you get to apocalyptic literature, of which Revelation and the book of Daniel are sort of the keys. And that's why I think so many people find it so confusing, is they expect that it's going to be straightforward, there's going to be something clear, some clear meaning, they're going to be able to draw, or something else, and it just doesn't work. And some of the stuff that I was reading is, you just read Revelation and just let it wash over you. just sort of, you know, let it just go over you. And every time you'll get wet a different way, right? Each time. So that's what we are going to do. So I'll start with chapter 1, and just some opening comments. I'm not going to go through this, and please stop me, ask questions anywhere. But chapter 1, it says the revelation to show what soon must take place. So the contemporary readers think, well, this is aimed at us. They have to redefine soon. And even the scholars aren't sure. Some say, well, it was what soon must take place in the historical context of the book. And others say, well, what the soon must take place is really pointing at what the rest of the book is. So what soon must take place is in the story of the book. I don't know how that one goes, but but clearly it was not, well, you first century folks, you can take comfort in this, but I'm really aiming it at the 21st century. Doesn't make much sense, 20th, 21st century. And you'll remember from last time, we talked about apocalyptic literature is given by God through an intermediary to a human, right? Mm-hmm. So Revelation is given by God to Jesus, to an angel, to John. Mm-hmm. So we got 2 intermediaries in there.
Was it John the younger or John the elder?
It's John.
Oh, John.
Yeah, just plain John.
It wasn't John 90 BC or 102 BC.
We don't know who it was. All we know is that he was John.
Oh, okay.
And we talked about this a little bit last time, but mostly the scholars say, well, he doesn't know Greek very well. Some of his constructions aren't really good, but he seems really good on anything that's sort of Semitic or Palestinian. So they assume that he was kind of a Palestinian Christian. Like I say, not good in Greek. We know, or as he says, that he was on the island of Patmos, and which is an island off. I'll have a map up here in a minute. Island off of the west coast of Asia Minor. It was a penal colony. But there's no indication in the book anywhere that he was there as an exile. He may have been a missionary. He may have had something to do with these 7 churches. We just don't know. But, until I started delving into this a little bit more, I'd always assumed he was there in exile. And if you look back on any sermons that I preached here that refers to John in Revelation, you'll probably see that I said he was in exile. So, oops. Keep learning.
So he may not have been there as a sentence.
No, he may have been there as a missionary.
Wow.
We just don't know. He has a vision, hears a voice, typical sort of revelation. And he says, I was there on the Lord's day and had a vision. This is the first mention in the New Testament of the Lord's Day as a sort of a Christian holy day. So, there's certainly references to the church meeting on Sundays, but nobody ever called it the Lord's Day until this book. I didn't know that either. Again, it's amazing what you learn when you start.
And we're sure that's referring to Sunday?
What's that?
We're sure that the Lord's Day is referring
Yeah,
to Sunday?
It wasn't Saturday?
Yeah. No, it would have been Sunday, because that would have been the day of the Lord, as opposed, so. Already, we talked last time about numbers, sevens. We already got a bunch of sevens in this first chapter. We've got, he's got the 7 churches, there are 7 lampstands, 7 stars. So the 7 start appearing really quickly. And we've got the imagery that starts immediately, a gold sash, sort of that purity, and the fire is a purifying agent. So all of this is set up in the first 8 verses. You get all of this stuff in this long book, sets it all up. Then he writes these 7 letters, or he's instructed to write these 7 letters, and they all fall in the same formula. You may have picked that up if you read them. There's an opening, to the angel of the church of such and so, write. Okay? They all start that way. I mean, the wording may be a little bit different, but they all start that way. Write, thus says, or similar words. There will be a title for Christ that's different to every church. Then there will be an evaluation. I know your works, I know this, you were really good at this, but boy, you're really bad at this. There's this sort of evaluation of what's going on in the church. And then there's some warning, like, buck up, or, and then a victory formula. There's always something that says, to whoever conquers, this will be the benefit. So he's clearly writing, and we see this in all of the letters, all of these 7 churches, writing to people who are experiencing some trauma. It could be persecution, it could be other things, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And so almost everyone, some more clearly than others, says, hold the line, stay the course, do fine, just be there. So those common features, and I'll point out some of those features as we go along. So here are the 7 churches. You see Patmos off there, off to the left, the island. And they form this kind of pointy thing, an arc, a horn, something, just where they were. And we know a lot about where they were. We know what the modern names of all of these places are. They're still there. And I thought that it would be interesting to see where Paul traveled, to see, this was just a question I had, to see if where Paul went had anything to do with these churches. And basically, no, other than he ran around Asia Minor. The only place that he really says that he was, where any of the rest of them were, is Ephesus. But none of the other places did he form churches in or anything like that. There's some speculation, I would forget which church it was, Laodicea or Thyatira, some speculation that the letter to Philemon, this tiny 1-chapter letter that Paul wrote, went to that church because Philemon lived there. But it wasn't addressed, So if you look at those maps, you see, Paul traveled a lot, but really didn't have much to do with Asia Minor other than Ephesus. He did travel through some of these places to get to other places because that's where the roads were. And he may have stopped, but he didn't have any significant impact in any of them. So I just thought that was kind of fascinating. And the other thing that you'll notice that I'd never known before was the order of the letters starts in Ephesus, goes up to Pergamum, and then down. It follows a line of those churches going up to Pergamum and then down to, it follows that order. It's not haphazard. And I don't know what that means. Nobody speculated, at least not in any of the commentaries or stuff that I looked at. So, any thoughts, questions before we get started into those churches? So Ephesus, capital of the province of Asia, fourth largest city in the empire. So this was a big place. It's currently known as Seljuk, but it was the most important city in the province. It was at the western terminus of a long caravan route from the east. So stuff came from, I don't know, Tibet, along the Silk Road, made it to Ephesus before it got put on a boat. So everything sort of ended up there. So it was a pretty important place. It was where the great temple of Artemis was. If you remember from the book of Acts, Paul gets in trouble in Ephesus because he's talking about this other god named Jesus, and they're saying, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians! Great is Artemis of the Ephesians!" You know, and they threw him out. And it was also a major center of emperor worship. So there was a lot going on. That amphitheater there sat 24,000 people. That's like a quarter of the population. And it had a thriving Jewish community. Josephus, our Jewish historian, tells us that. And it was the base for Paul's work, so it was also an important Christian center. But we don't know a lot about the church, other than it was important. So the Christ is him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and walks among the 7 lampstands. That's how Christ is depicted in the letter to the Ephesians. They're commended for their toil, their patient endurance, their discrimination between true and false apostles, and rejection of false teaching. We don't know exactly what the false teaching was, but he refers to this group called the Nicolaitans. Nobody knows what they were. There's speculation on who Nicholas was, but nobody knows exactly who they were. Given what, they sort of show up in a couple of the letters, but given what was said about them, and this Jezebel, who we heard about, they may have been really easy with accommodation to the culture. You don't have to be really strict. You can be kind of loose, you know. So that sort of easing of the discipline is what he was holding them accountable for. And so, you know, the recommendation is, remember from what you have fallen. You used to be doing this, and now you're not. So repent and do the works you did at first. Just calling them back to sort of their first love. And then if you do that, I will give permission to eat from the tree of life that is in the paradise of God. Whoever conquers, that's what you get. So that's that church. We'll come back to some of these common themes. But as I was poking around, I found 7 descriptions of these 7 churches, and they're just kind of 2 sentences. So Ephesus was the loveless church. The people in Ephesus were hardworking people who endured and hated evil. From the outside, they may have looked like they had it together, but their hearts were wrong. The 2 greatest commandments are to love God and love people, and Ephesus was missing the commandment of love. Okay, so we go from Ephesus to Smyrna, the modern Izmir. Nicaea is Iznik, so Smyrna is Izmir. I love the way the Turks did that. Big city, 100,000 people, you know, at that time. That's a lot of folk. It's a lot of folk. It was the first city to build a temple to the goddess Rome. And so it was a center of emperor worship. It was also the end of a trade route, had a great harbor. And we read in here, there's stories about the false synagogue, or the synagogue of Satan, or so-called Jews. And the scholarly debate about who those people were generally circles around the fact that these could have been people who weren't even good observant Jews. And so they're just sort of lackadaisical Jews. The Jews in the empire had certain privileges. They didn't have to worship the emperor, for example. And so another scholar said, well, these Christians claimed that they were Jews so they could get off with sort of the Jewish exemption, so they didn't have to play by the Christian rules anymore. So we don't know what it means, but it's certainly, none of the scholars say that this has anything to do with anti-Semitism. This is none of the stuff in any of these letters. But there's not much of the Jewish community there, no evidence for Jewish-Roman collusion against Christians. That's true. Satan is mentioned the first time here in these letters. That shows up later in the book, but here, the synagogue of Satan, he writes against that. So the title for Christ is the first and last who was dead and came to life. So we get a lot of early Christian teaching about Jesus in this. If we were to pile all of these titles one upon another, we'd get a lot. The church looks like it had experienced economic discrimination and sanctions, that they're under hardship, yet they're described as rich. So Smyrna was wealthy, and so here they were counseled to get their wealth from other places. So harassed, leading to imprisonment and death, and they were slandered. Was the synagogue Jews or Jewish Christians? So they were under hardship. And the words of warning: be faithful until death and receive the crown of life. And whoever conquers will not be harmed by the second death. They weren't doing anything wrong. They were just persecuted. There are two churches that were not criticized for anything, and Smyrna was one. No rebuke for this persecuted church. They were continually under physical hardship, promised that they would not be hurt by the second death, so the death after the resurrection. Encouraged, stay faithful even when facing physical death. So again, churches under hardship, both of them. Pergamum, up at the top, another 100,000 population. There's a lot of people back there. We never think of cities being this big. Yeah. They had temples to Rome, Caesar, and a very large temple to Zeus, temple to Athena, Dionysus, and Asclepius. Asclepius was the god of healing. And so it was the capital of Asia before Augustus Caesar moved it to Ephesus. So it had a lot of sort of historical importance. Had a famous school of sculpture, lot and wealth from agriculture and mining and stock breeding and all that kind of stuff. And it had a large library that, if you know anything about libraries in the ancient world, which was the largest?
Alexandria.
Yeah, this one rivaled Alexandria. Apparently.
Wow.
So again, these are not, backwaters places. Him who has the sharp two-edged sword is the title for Christ. The church holds fast to its faith, even in the place where there's Satan's throne. Now, was that Zeus? Was it the emperor? But clearly there were a lot of big temples there. So the question is, who is Satan's throne? And what did that mean? They were approved for tolerating the teaching of Balaam and the Nicolaitans and Jezebel, all of these guys who encouraged accommodation to pagan culture. And usually what that meant was that they were eating food sacrificed to idols. And so therefore not living up to what they ought to be doing. Balaam, do you remember the story of Balaam? He was regarded, at least at this time, was regarded as the prototype of corrupt teachers. Balaam's ass, if you remember the good story from the Hebrew Bible, and led Israel to intermarriage and idolatry. So this whole sense of keeping yourself pure and faithful is being attacked here. And of course, Jezebel, about whom we heard this morning, you remember that Jezebel married Ahab and brought in all of her prophets of Baal, right? And Elijah had this big battle against the prophets of Baal, and they had their rival sacrifices, and the prophets of Baal were doing their thing, and nothing happened, and Ahab I mean, Elijah did his thing and worked, and all the prophets were slain, which did not endear him to Jezebel. And so she was also one to lead Israel astray. So here are these analogies, or as we talked about last time, here's looking back to look forward. You're talking about figures that people knew about. They could say, oh, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. The non-cognoscenti don't, but I get what you're saying. They're warned, basically, repent. It's pretty simple. And if you do, I will give you some of the hidden manna, so some secret food, divine food, and I will give a white stone, and on the white stone is written a new name that no one knows except the one who receives it. So what is the white stone? And the ideas are that it was some kind of an amulet, a piece of white stone, an amulet with perhaps this secret name carved on it. Others say that all of the surrounding stone, surrounding Pergamum, was dark. You know, so all of the houses were built out of dark stone and all of that. To have a piece of white stone set you apart. What was the secret name? Was this kind of like a jellicle name, you know, from cats that only, only the cat knew? Or was it just some kind of new Christian name? Or was it Christ? That you had this stone that had Christ's name on it. No one knows. But it was something, clearly, that would have been different than what everybody else would have had. We don't know. So this church was a tolerant church, although they refused to deny Christ. They allowed sin like idols, immorality, cults, and heresies to remain among them. Again, this wasn't a pure place. So Thyatira, the modern name for this is Akhisar. It was a center of industry or commerce, but unimportant, politically or religiously. It was just there. It had trade goods and religious diversity, and it was known for its woolen goods. And we hear about Thyatira. Paul must have gone through there, because you remember a woman by the name of Lydia, a seller of purple from Thyatira. So here's this reference to these woolen goods and the fabric and all of this that shows up outside of here, but we don't know much about it other than that. We have a title for Christ, the Son of God, who has eyes like a flame of fire. Now we're getting more imagery, right? And whose feet are like burnished bronze. The sort of dramatic imagery begins to show up. They're commended for their love and patient endurance and their faithfulness, but they tolerate Jezebel. Here she comes again. Encouraging accommodation to pagan culture. So hold fast to what you have. Hold fast. Don't be seduced by Jezebel. And if you do that, I will give you authority over the nations to rule them with an iron rod, as when clay pots are shattered, even as I also received authority from my Father. To the one who conquers, I will also give the morning star. No one's quite clear about what the morning star is. Clearly a good reward. And there's a reference to the deep things of Satan in this letter to Thyatira. Again, a little uncertain. Was that some sort of Gnosticism, some kind of secret knowledge? That there were Gnostics around saying that, you really have to know what we know to be saved. And were they giving into that, or was this some sort of an emperor worship, the deep things of Satan? Not really sure. But, so the Thyatirans were loving, faithful, good people, but their doctrine was a little infiltrated by idolatry and sin and pagan traditions. And we get to Sardis, 75,000 people in Sardis, the former capital of Lydia, a center of the imperial cult. There were a number of earthquakes, obviously, that, they rolled through Asia Minor with great regularity. And some of these cities got destroyed, and some of them took money from the emperor to rebuild. And so because of that, they put up a temple to the emperor. So there was one of these there, very, very wealthy city, and it was accused by early Greek historians of their luxury and immorality. So this was not just a Christian thing. And they had big synagogue there, according to Josephus. So the title for Christ here, we got 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars, more 7s showing up. It was a reputation of being live, but really dead. But they refer to some who have not soiled their clothes. So you remember last time we talked about white being the symbol of purity. And so white clothing, white raiment, all of that is pure. If it got soiled, then it wasn't pure white anymore. So the soiling of the clothes was moral impurity, not necessarily cultic. So that was the criticism of the Sardis folk. Wake up, return to your original teachings. That seems to be a recurrent theme, right? You've lost what you originally had. And watch out, I'm coming like a thief. But that wasn't meant necessarily be a threat and more of assurance. Wake up, I'm going to be here soon. Don't worry, I'm going to be here soon. This isn't, wake up and fly right, not the same kind of thing. If you conquer, you'll be clothed like them in white robes. And I will not blot your name out of the book of life. I will confess your name before my Father and before his angels. So this is what Christ can do. Now, what does the book of life mean? Idea traced by some to the influence of Jewish thought, of astrological speculation, is that there was some cosmic book of life. It's found elsewhere in the Old Testament, New Testament. Nobody really knows where it came from. It just sort of did. So this was a spiritually dead church. They'd fallen asleep spiritually, except for a small remnant, those who hadn't soiled their clothes. And then the dead church was encouraged to rekindle and revive any small bit of faith that they had left. So I don't know, kind of an interesting part of the geography and all this stuff going on. But we'll come back to that in a minute. And then Philadelphia, honored emperors. They got help in rebuilding after an earthquake in 17 CE. And so they added to the name New Caesarea, New Caesar, and Flavia, the Flavians, the imperial house. So they added that to their name. It was commercially important, trade link, but other than that, somewhat indistinct. For Christ, the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens. So Christ has power to sort of fix the future. The church is commended holding fast to Christ's name and persevering despite pagan pressures. So if you read these letters, you can see what these summaries are pointing at. So hold fast to what you have. Have we heard that before? It's just there over and over again. To the one who conquers, I will make you a pillar in the temple of my God. You will never go out of it. I will write on you the name of my God. So here's another reference to writing a name. So is that the name that's on the white stone? I don't know. And the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem that comes down from God out of heaven, and my own new name. So here are 3 other possibilities for what a name might be, in addition to what there might be a new name for the believer. Nobody had is the new name Pergamum? Who knows? Isn't it relating to that one Pergamum? And then I'm coming soon is assurance. And this is the other church that's not criticized for anything. Okay, so Philadelphia and Smyrna, not criticized. They kept the name of Jesus and never denied it, so just hold fast. You don't have to return, just hold fast. And then the last of the churches, Laodicea, large, wealthy city. It was so wealthy it didn't need imperial money to rebuild after an earthquake in 60. So they were just big and important. The thing about Laodicea is that it got its water. It was not on a river. It got its water from an aqueduct coming from a spring 4 miles away. So you've seen pictures of Roman aqueducts, right? Mm-hmm. Built up, open, they look like, canal. They look like the Highline Canal, only on stilts, right? It's open, it's not covered. And this is not a cold part of the world. So by the time the water got from the spring to Laodicea, it was warm, probably, okay? Now, a neighboring city, you don't see it on this map, was Hierapolis, and it had hot springs. So they were hot. And it had, the city had a considerable community. But the reason I bring up that geographical stuff is that it shows up in the letter. The title for Christ is The Amen, the faithful and true witness, the origin of God's creation. The evaluation of the church is, I would that you were cold or hot, but you are just lukewarm, and I will spew you out of my mouth. So where does this cold, hot thing come from? And so the scholars are speculating that they had experience with hot water by going to Hierapolis. They went all the way to the springs, they could have gotten cold, but in the city itself, it was just lukewarm. And so they were apathetic, wavering, complacent in their material well-being. Well, whatever, I'll do this because, all the cool people are doing it, or something like that. So they were warned to get goods from Christ by their gold and white robes, not the local stuff. Be earnest and repent in Christ. This is where, if you didn't read it, this is where, behold, I stand at the door and knock. This is the letter to that church where that comes up at. We see it a lot. You see the picture, of course. And, if you look at the picture, people like to point this out. Christ is knocking at the door and there's no doorknob on the outside, so you have to open it from the inside. I mean, there are a lot of things that are sort of attributed to this story. But it is a story about a church, not an individual. We're waiting for you. I'm here, and you'll be able to share in the Messianic banquet, which of course has overtones, Eucharistic overtones. So the hot and cold thing is were they hot and cold towards Christ, or were they just kind of lackadaisical? And if you conquer, I'll give you a place with me on the throne, just as I myself conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. So those are the letters to the churches, and it just stops. That's the end of the letters to the churches. And chapter 4 begins another vision. And I was looking, I said, is there any transition? No. It just, boom, here are the letters to the 7 churches. And then it starts into all of the apocalyptic weird stuff. All the visions, more visions. And so I was asking myself, mostly, what are the lessons from those 7 churches? I mean, what were the common themes? And how does that then translate into the rest of the book of Revelation? So what did, in your read, we'll just spend a few minutes on this, in your read or in what we just talked about, what did you hear as being the common themes?
To hang in there.
Okay, so perseverance. Perseverance. In the face of persecution or hardship, persevere. Okay?
And change your ways back to where they were.
Yeah, go back to where the faith that you'd originally gained, okay?
Continual progress.
Say again?
Continual progress.
Continue, keep living and moving forward, yeah?
And something's coming.
Yeah, something is coming, who knows? Kind of like a thief in the night. What else? One that sort of we're teasing around, but. Don't accommodate to culture. Because that's what they were all doing. It's okay if I eat food or, sacrifice to idols. It's okay. You know, on the other hand, Paul would say, yeah, it doesn't make any difference, you're wise enough to be able to do that, but there are these weak people over here who don't know how to make that distinction, and that was his point about eating meat sacrificed to idols. It doesn't make any difference. We know that the idols are dumb and stupid and don't have any reality, so meat sacrificed has no value, but these people over here, they don't get that yet. So we want to put a stumbling block in there, so that don't, and certainly we see this in early Christianity. Well, you're saved, so how you live doesn't make any difference. That there's not necessarily a correlation between your saved status and your moral status. Okay, I'm saved, I can live any way I want. We begin to see that in the New Testament. It becomes really apparent in the 2nd century. So there are these things that I'm going to assume as we move into the rest of Revelation, these are at the background of this. And given all of this stuff that soon must happen, know what your status is so that you can make sense of what soon must happen. Where should you stand in relationship to this? And so there's a reference in one of these letters to a martyr named Antipas. Nobody knows who he was. But we certainly hear about a lot of martyrs coming up in the rest of Revelation. And they throw their crowns at the feet of God. Who are these dressed in white? Well, now we know who the ones dressed in white are. So there's a lot of setup in these 7 letters, but it's not linear. It's not like, well, by the way, now here you've had the 7 letters. Let's give you a summary so that you know how to read that. And one of the other things that was clear in the beginning is that this was meant to be read aloud. And I forget, it's in one of the first 6 or 7 verses, to be read aloud. And so it wasn't, I'm going to take this to my closet and read it by myself. It wasn't sort of secret passing on of knowledge. This was public, to be read aloud in these congregations. So there was and that, I think that helps, because it means that it's not being mediated through one person saying, well, you don't have to wait, we don't have to. If you've got everybody hearing the same thing, they're going to move out of that, maybe united. So those are the 7 churches. It's not bizarre. The bizarre stuff happens in a few weeks. Bishop Epting will be back, and we'll talk about that. There's a little bit in there. I thought about lining up all of the titles of Christ. I didn't get around to that, just to see what that was. And all of the things that you're going to inherit if you persevere. But clearly it's about persevering, keeping the faith, keeping your garments from being soiled, all those kinds of things. In other words, be good Christians, and that'll be okay. Yeah, Murray.
So, I was starting to think that this was all themes, but you mentioning being read public, all the behaviors they're talking about have some public component, like opening the door, dealing with other people. So there's, I don't know how to express it, but
Yeah, it's not private. It's not a private religion. Yeah.
Private.
Yeah, and certainly some of them, I forget which letter it was, one of the first 2, they're under they're feeling persecution, right? Mm-hmm. They may be subject to imprisonment and death. So whatever they were doing, there was some obvious nature to it that people could identify. And maybe it was that they weren't offering a pinch of incense to the emperor, or doing other things that had to do with sort of the public religion of the day, and they weren't participating in it. And so that made them problematic to the rest of the folks. So yeah, there was something public to it. And these people, they were meeting together. There were churches there. How large they were, we have no idea. Jesus had been dead for 60 years. The church had, Paul had been dead by the time this was written, 30 or 40 years. So what was going on? Yeah.
So was this written before or after the fall of Jerusalem?
Oh, after. Yeah. Most scholars put it in 90-95, so 20 years after the fall of Jerusalem.
Wasn't it added to the Bible about 700 AD? That we know.
I mean, it was included in the. I'd have to go back and I'll do this because you asked to sort of trace when it was in, when it was out, when it was in, who has it in, and all those kinds of things. But it was added to the main canon of the east and the west at the end of the 5th century. So 487, something like that.
Yeah.
But there are still some churches, there's one of the churches, ancient churches, that does not have it in its scripture. Just kind of like Luther didn't want James in the Bible. So, well, don't read it, that's fine. Anyway, thank you all. And
So thank you.
like I say, next time, Chris will be back and talking about weird stuff.
So it'll be
Questions?
out 3 weeks?
The 20th. The 20th
July.
of July. So next week, we're having the potluck thing. The week after that's 4th of July weekend. The weekend after that, I'm gone, and Chris may be too, so the weekend after that, 20th, he'll do it, and then 2 weeks after that, and then 2 weeks after that.
Won't do one at a time.
Or every other week after that. It was just this one that was really the weird one, because of some weird schedule changes. So, yeah. Any other questions?
What language was this originally written in?
It was in Greek.
Because I'm curious about the word conquers. 'Cause
Say again?
I'm curious just about the word conquers, and I wonder, that often just means conquering another people.
Those who
I was
conquer?
thinking of it as conquering their bad habits.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, those who conquer all of this other stuff that's out there and are faithful,
Yeah.
in this battle against Satan and Satan's dominions and all those other kinds of things. To them, they will get this wonderful thing.
Yeah, I just wondered if there was a more subtle word in the original.
No, I'd have to look, but I'll look up conquering. I'll look up conquer and I'll look up Revelation canon. Cool.
We know we'll be running hot when we go outside.
Yes. We will be.
By the way, the plumbing problem has been resolved.
See
The plumbing problem has been
It's
resolved.
been resolved.
Take that off your.
Oh, yeah, I saw you walk today.
Yeah, and then Mary Ann actually fixed it herself.
Oh. There we go.
Far handier than I was.
All of these wonderfully capable people.
Yep.